This is James Lupton, and I'm delighted to be joined once again with Stitch Duran. Stitch, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing good, man. Sorry about yesterday. Sometimes things just don't work out. My internet was down, and it was a pain in the ass. But I'm glad that we have a chance to chat again.
No, absolutely. We're here now, so that's all that matters, Stitch. Don't you worry. We're going to talk a little bit about Francis Ngannou today. We recently saw his boxing debut with Tyson Fury, and some are calling it the greatest professional boxing debut ever, even though he lost. What did you make of Ngannou? Did he shock you with how good he was?
Well, no, no, not at all. Number one, he's a fighter, and I know the trainers, Dewey and Eric, and then of course Mike was there. So he showed him some of the basic skills. But yeah, I knew he was going to be tough because number one, he's an MMA fighter, and they kind of go a little bit higher when it comes to the pain threshold and endurance. So I knew if he was going to take shots from Tyson Fury, that he would be able to absorb them a little bit better than maybe your average boxer. But what a night, man! Just to see all those Hall of Famers and all these great people that are in the industry, it was a spectacular show.
No, absolutely. And did that sort of, show the world this spectacle and what level this spectacle was at to see all these Hall of Famers out there, the who's who of boxing in attendance for this fight?
Yeah, it definitely brought a lot of attention to it. To see all these legendary guys and just to be involved with MMA guys and boxing guys, and to get these guys involved was a pretty special event for these guys. The first one's always the best. Though you got to do the first one, you got to make it the best as you can, so people can talk about it, right? We're talking about it now, so they did pretty good. One of the things, Tali Allah Sheikh, which is, I guess, the main guy, he friended me. My daughter called me like 2, 3 days after the event. He says, "Dad, Tara Allah Sheikh is following you, and he has 15 million followers." She says he has 581 that he follows, and you're one of them. So hopefully, I'll get the opportunity to do an event up there, and but just to get that kind of recognition was pretty special for me.
No, definitely. Um, After the fight, Francis Ngannou was spoken about by Mauricio Sulaiman as potentially ranking him in the top 10 with the WBC. Um, my next question is going to be, has Francis Ngannou got a future in boxing?
Yeah, I mean, I just worked with F.A. Agaba over the weekend, and yeah, of course he has an opportunity. He can only get better on what he does. Skill level. He's an A+ fighter. To improve in getting into the boxing world and understanding what goes on in training, what goes on during a fight. What goes on in the long rounds instead of 5, you're going 12. To understand all that is he's a fighter, he's a warrior. I think he'll be able to make the adjustments pretty well, and I think you'll see him in the mix.
If he were to be ranked top 10 by the WBC, do you feel that would be fair on whoever may be ranked number 10 at the time who gets knocked down to 11 because Ngannou then steps in? Somebody who has worked, let's say, potentially all their life in boxing to get to this stage. Would that be fair on them? Or because Ngannou has put in the work just in a different discipline, is he just as worthy?
That's a good point, and I'm sure a lot of people are asking that question. But let's get some fights under his belt. Number one, he's going to get high profile fights anyway, regardless. He'll get a top 10 guy, and let him work from there on up. I think it's only fair for the industry. You don't want to jumpstart and put him up in the front line only because he performed well against Tyson Fury. Everybody has to pay their dues, and he's coming into a new world, which is boxing. And in all fairness, I don't think Francis cares whether he's in the top 10 or not, as long as he's making some bank, and he's fighting some high-profile fighters. And I think they were talking about him and Anthony Joshua in Africa. So everything's marketing 101 at this point, and you got to back it up with power, and Francis has the power.
Well, I was going to come on to a few potential fights for Francis, and you mentioned one there, Anthony Joshua out in Africa. You mentioned that he doesn't care if he's ranked as long as he's making a lot of money, and that fight makes a lot of money out there. Just that, first of all, that fight, how do you see that going if it were to happen?
Well, Anthony Joshua, of course, he beat Vladimir Klitschko, and I was with Vladimir, right? So Anthony could fight. Technique-wise, he's real good. Whether he could take a shot from Francis Ngannou, then that's always the question. It seems like Francis is the new Mike Tyson coming into the game. He's going to come in with power, and I think people understand that. So we'll see what happens. It should be and not only that, but Francis is only going to get better between now and then. And so we'll see what happens.
Another name that was also mentioned was Deontay Wilder. A lot of fans want to see that fight. It's just two guys who are knockout artists. This fight, if it were to go ahead, surely doesn't hear the final bell.
Yeah, that's a tough one, man. Deontay Wilder is he's a beast. One thing you're not going to lose is his power. And then he's so long and lanky. So you look at he's not short, but at the stocky, not as fast as, I'm sure he's not going to be as fast as Deontay Wilder. We'll see. Deontay Wilder has the capability of knocking anybody out. Francis Ngannou is going to have to prove stage 2 whether he can knock people out. If it goes the distance, that's a different story. But I don't see it going the distance. I really don't.
No, I can't either. I can't either. In terms of, we mentioned a future in boxing for Francis, would that be a loss to the MMA world and to PFL, who recently signed him? Or do they need to start putting up a bit more money to keep hold of their stars?
Oh, you loaded up some questions, brother. I like that. Yeah, that's a new transition. That's a transition that I think you're going to see guys going into. You see guys now that have left the MMA industry now are doing bare knuckle fights because they're paying good money. So that's a good point. That's a really good point. And I think at the end of the day, MMA is going to have to, pick up their budget and start paying these guys a little bit more. So that's a very, very good point. And I think, the industry is starting to see that type of evolution. And, I think everybody has to thank Francis Ngannou for that. So, it's a big move, but I'm looking at Alan Boucher's doing the bare knuckle fights, all these guys, Roy Nelson, they're all doing bare knuckle fights, all these guys. So it gives you other options.
Absolutely. Another guy who is signed to PFL, not necessarily in an MMA capacity, or not yet at least, is Jake Paul. Could that potentially be a massive showdown down the line in boxing or in the cage for PFL to put Ngannou in against Jake Paul, regardless of what the weight may be?
Oh no, you'll never see that, man. It's too big of a difference. Way, way too big of a difference. And props to Jake Paul. He's smart. He's good. He's an athlete. And we were talking about it just yesterday with some friends. Is both Logan and Jake Paul. When I first met them, they told me they were high school wrestlers. And wrestlers, when I had my school kickboxing, wrestlers that made that transition into kickboxing did a very good job because they're used to the pain, they're used to the grappling, they're used to the drying out. They're doing all that. But yeah, Jake Paul and Francis Ngannou, way too big of a difference. Wouldn't be fair.
No, absolutely. Stitch, that's all I wanted to ask you today. I appreciate your time as always. It's always a pleasure speaking to yourself.
Thank you, man. I had a blast.
Thank you.